Se termina el TM Forum Latin American Summit. Estamos en la última entrevista de la cobertura especial que hemos estado haciendo desde Sao Paulo estos 2 últimos días, donde se celebraba esta primera edición de un evento que estoy seguro que se seguirá celebrando en el futuro, porque el tema que se trataba hoy no es un tema circunstancial de ahora, sino que es un tema importante que va a estar avanzando en los próximos años debido a la transición o transformación que se ha tratado de discutir en este congreso, y que evidentemente no es una transición que se pueda hacer de un día para otro, sino que hay todos unos mecanismos que hay que poner en marcha, y además el mercado, como conocemos, va variando y hay que irse adaptando. Así que la transformación puede estar durando casi una década. Creo que estaríamos de acuerdo casi todos en este dato. Para cerrar el congreso de este año, el primero, como decía, tenemos a Martin Creaner, que es el chairman y CEO del TM Forum, con el que vamos a estar cerrando la cobertura en inglés, y así aprovechamos para cubrir un poquito el mensaje del TM Forum, que creo que es importante. Martin, welcome to Telesemana.
Thank you very much.
So my first question to you would be, or my first comment, and I want to see your reaction, would be that we were quite scared in your presentation, and we are not service providers. You were not apocalyptic, and that's very exaggerating, but you were warning the audience about a lot of challenges that the industry faces. Too many challenges, I thought it was. So tell us about those, and if you agree with my view that, you know, we are not facing something simple here.
We're absolutely not facing something simple. It's a massive change that is underway in the industry, but it shouldn't be viewed as apocalyptic. It is a change that provides massive opportunity for those that react, and massive challenges for those that believe they don't need to react. Mm-hmm. And so I would view the presentation yesterday as more of a wake-up call, mm-hmm. a call to arms, a challenge to the industry to take on this big opportunity.
Okay. Now you said things. One of the things that you said was that in 100 years the industry didn't have to evolve or change much, and yes, suddenly we have to change, but not a little bit. I mean, we're talking about a big change.
Absolutely.
So why don't you explain a little bit to our audience what that means? I mean, because I thought it was very concise what you said.
Yeah, I think that for the last 100 years, the telecoms industry has delivered 2 basic services. For a long time, just one, which was called voice. Mm-hmm. And then it became voice and a little bit of data, messaging, and so on. But over the last 5 years, that has grown into gaming and entertainment and movies and books and so on. And over the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to include healthcare and automotive management and electricity meter management and home environment management and security services, and basically everything that can be digitized will be digitized. Mm-hmm. There's a whole load of industries out there that are already selling those services, financial services, banks, and so on. And the telecoms companies, the communication companies, have an opportunity to actually sell into those marketplaces. So instead of it being a $1.5 trillion industry, it's probably 3 or 4 or 5 times that size. But of course, there's lots of other players who want to keep being relevant in those industries. And so we had 100 years of very little change, a lot of monopoly and very stable changes in technology, but no changes in business model. Mm-hmm. We've had 5 years of quite rapid change, and we're going to have another 5 or 10 years of incredibly rapid change. And the whole thing will eventually settle down, where there are a number of key players who are dominating the communications and infrastructure and computing world, and there's lots of players who are making services, and there's a small number of players who are actually retailing those services like supermarkets out to the world. But they'll no longer be voice. Of course there will still be voice, but it'll be a small part of the market. It'll be heart monitors to check your blood pressure, and it will be monitors in your car to test your tire pressure, and to pay your parking and to pay your tolls and so on. And we have little bits of that already. It'll be e-payment systems for everything you purchase on the street, from a vending machine, a movie ticket, a subway, a train ticket, and so on. And that will be the industry we are in 10 years' time. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
Yeah, we saw that.
I don't know the details.
Yeah.
I don't know the details of how it's all going to shake down, but that's the way the world is going to look. And you have to set your mind for, how am I going to be relevant? There's this phrase called value chain. Everybody talks about value chains. And the statement of the obvious about value chains is the only way you get to play in a value chain is if you add value. And so which bit of value which value chain are you going to play in, and which bit of value are you going to add? Everybody has to answer. It's a simple question, a hard answer, but it's a simple question.
Okay. From your view, and that's just my perception of the panel that we saw after that, and we saw two operators, I'm not going to mention who they were, but we saw two operators, and it seemed to me that one operator was saying, come on, the change is coming, but, don't need to panic anybody. And another operator, and actually the roles were kind of changed, I thought it was going to be the opposite, saying, no, the change is coming and I'm afraid of it. I don't know if in your view you're seeing here in Latin America something that perhaps all these things that you're mentioning, metering, paying tolls with your car and things like that, sound too futuristic, and perhaps we are not aware that, as you're saying, in 10 years, they're going to be here anyways. Perhaps you don't see it everywhere, because you're going to have a digital divide here, but you're going to see it.
You're going to see it, absolutely, and this market is no different. I mean, the time shift in communications markets across the world now is incredibly short. What happens in the most advanced market, and that would maybe be Korea, Japan, what happens in the most advanced market is in almost every other it used to take 10 years, and then it take 5 years. Now it's probably 2 or 3 years, right? In Japan, I believe last year there was about $150 billion worth of mobile payments made using mobile phones and NFC cards. Massive amounts of money are happening, and that's going to happen. It'll be here in 3 years' time if it's not already here today. And of course, it is kind of here today, because there's lots of little bits happening in pockets. And when you talk to the cable companies, the telcos, and so on, they've got all the sophistication that they need. They have some other problems that they're focusing on, but they can see this coming down the road, and it'll be here very soon. And in 10 years' time, 10 years is a very long time.
Yeah, but my question, exactly, and you're right, but my question was, if you see perhaps here operators saying, it's not that terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Everywhere, every country in the world has operators who say it's not so terrible. Okay. They have shareholders to worry about and so on. But when I talk to them, they all recognize this problem. There is a difference. Cable operators can handle part of this problem much more effectively because of the way they're structured, whereas mobile operators are continually fighting this big, massive demand for bandwidth. And that's a much bigger challenge for them. Cable operators can kind of say, well, we've got the infrastructure in place, and I can live with it. So I think there's that slight difference between cable and mobile, but the opportunity is there, the challenges are there, and of course you're going to find companies who say, we're doing okay, we made 20% margin on our services last year. Isn't that great? Yes, it is, but we're talking 10 years down the road. So not everybody will get it, but the ones that get it could make a lot of money.
Now, you said something also interesting. You said that in 10 years' time, we will see probably 10 big operators owning most of the infrastructure, and then we will see a second layer of service providers using that infrastructure to offer services. Now, going to utopia, because I think that's actually more efficient than what we're seeing today. We're seeing markets with 3-4 operators replicating coverage, using a spectrum, and then you have one operator dominating the market with, squeezing their spectrum, and another with less than half of those users not squeezing the spectrum and probably having a spectrum free. So from utopia speaking, wouldn't it be even better to say, listen, we need to build a couple of highways, mobile highways, and then promote services, even from the regulatory standpoint?
Well, you look at countries like Australia. That's a great example. So there's a massive program in Australia called NBN-CO, National Broadband Network, where the government is investing, I don't know the exact numbers, around $50-60 billion to build a massive...
That's Australia,
build a massive fibre backbone, or not just a backbone, but a fibre network for the whole country that all service providers can then use. So I talked about barriers to entry falling yesterday.
Yes.
And that's a really important point, because previously I had to have, if I wanted to set up a big telco in Mexico or wherever, Venezuela, I would need to have probably $10 billion behind me, because I have to put in a massive network. if somebody is going to put that in, a government, and make it available on fair and reasonable terms to all parties who come, suddenly all I need is maybe 50 million or 10 million or 50 million or 100 million. So it becomes, the barriers to entry really drop for me to become a serious player in those countries. And if all I want to do is not run the network at all, just create the services that sit on top of the network, then the barriers to entry are almost non-existent. So Singapore is doing exactly what you talked about, is putting in place a national network. Australia is putting in place a national network. And it's going to start making increasing sense for lots of countries to do that. There are big challenges, but the other big challenge that countries face, particularly in North America, they've got the net neutrality challenge. Sure. And they've got the issue that there is huge amounts of data going over networks, swamping networks, and nobody paying for it, really. Pirate movies being looked on video and so on. And the increasingly telcos want to be able to block give preferential access to fee-paying data and block the data that's going for free. But of course there's regulatory rules which stop them doing that. And one way around that is for governments to take on the network and put the problem back onto the government. So of course there will be privately held networks. And when I talk about it consolidating into a small number of players, I am talking about, look at this region, Telefonica, America Mobiles. That's about,
those are the two that are going to have the infrastructure.
They will have massive amounts of it, and it'll stop becoming economically viable for anybody else. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what's going to happen exactly in this region, but that's one way of looking at it. You could see that in North America. AT&T and Verizon will own network, and everybody else will piggyback on. In Europe, maybe Telefonica and Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom would own network. So there will be a relatively small number of players who will have the economies of scale in order to own sufficient network on a regional basis or on a global basis, and then lots of other players will sit on top of that.
Yeah, that also left the question open with tier 2 or tier 3 operators. And if in 10 years' time we're going to see that kind of shift, then and we had some operators here, tier 2.
Yeah.
What is in terms of they are talking about transformation and so on. It reaches a point where transformation would be giving up your infrastructure and try to just go for services.
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
Okay,
that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's the answer.
I think there's going to be a relatively small number of players who own the infrastructure. And I'm not just talking about communications, I'm talking about computing and storage. So it's going to be infrastructure providers who provide you the communications infrastructure, the computing infrastructure, the processing infrastructure, the storage infrastructure. And then sitting on top of that, there's going to be thousands of people creating intelligent services, utilising that infrastructure, maybe utilising some very comprehensive platforms, billing platforms and location-based platforms, authentication platforms. And there's going to be a massive growth of those services. And then, I'm not sure about the top, but there'll be people who are retailing those services. And one argument says, a supermarket model is the way it's going to go, where it's a small number of very powerful retailers who retail everything from communication services to healthcare services to home management services and so on. And another argument says there'll be lots of little retailers each focusing on a niche. I don't really know how that one will go. But if you imagine that sort of world, all of the big infrastructure investment gets swallowed up and you start getting massive economies of scale. It's a relatively low margin business, it's a commodity business. But commodity businesses are great businesses to be in if you can get the economy of scale.
True. CNT said in her presentation, I think Rocío is her name, she said that one of the things she's fighting within CNT is the fact that human mentality. So members of her team or the whole organization is still thinking the old ways. And we're talking about a tier 2 operator.
Yeah.
So do you think that's the major, we're talking about integration, BSS, OSS, boundaries disappearing, and so on. But do you think that at the end of the day it comes down to actually the people working in the operator? Because we're talking about these machines, and at the end of the day, machines.
People are always the biggest challenge. Cultural change is always the biggest challenge. It's not my area of expertise, but when I look at companies that have gone through transformation, when you talk to the people who've led that transformation, you spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about technology and processes and so on, and then you spend 5 hours talking about the people problems that they face, because there's organizational problems, there's cultural problems, there's
legal even.
Legal problems, there's absolutely.
If you automate stuff and
So people, changing the minds of people, it's a leadership challenge, and the great transformations are led from the top through vision by a CEO. It can't be a transformation led by the head of network operations, or a transformation led by the chief technology officer. It has to be a transformation led by the CEO, saying, our company is here today, we're going over there, everybody come with me. Now there's lots of things that need to happen on the way, but we all have to get there, and you have to get your organization bought into the vision of where it's going to go to.
Okay. Do you expect to do the show next year?
Absolutely.
Here or?
We will see. I mean, we'll evaluate it, but my view is this has been very successful. We've been very happy here.
We agree with that view, by the way.
Yeah, but there's a great number of companies that are, Sao Paulo is a very good place to actually do business. People say, going to Mexico City would be a very good place to do a regional show as well. We will decide where it will be, but I'm pretty determined we will have a show this time of the year, roughly next year, in this region.
Okay. Well, if I can recommend Argentina, it's my
Argentina
duty. It's my duty to recommend
as well.
it.
Absolutely, and I would love to go to Buenos Aires and bring an event there as well. And so we're going to look at the various options and where we will get. I mean, at the end of the day, we put an event where the business is.
Our headquarters are in Argentina.
Absolutely, I would love to go to Argentina. Absolutely.
All right. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for inviting us to the coverage. It's been great, and the input has been very interesting. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thanks.